This is Todd Johnston from the Johnston County Heritage Center, and it's my pleasure to share with you some of our resources that we have for doing African American genealogical research. We are very pleased to have a database of slave records. It's an ongoing project that we are continually adding information to, but we do have a searchable database that includes a lot of the tax records, land records that have slave transactions, and other resources that we have that include names and biographical information in some cases of enslaved persons in Johnston County. I will say a little bit about this later, but you can go to our website, which is the shortcut is jchheritagecenter.org. There's a long, if you do a Google search on Johnston County Heritage Center, it will take you to our website also. But if you are typing in the URL, it's jchheritagecenter.org. We have quite a few genealogical search databases that you will find on our homepage, or you'll find the link on our homepage. We have over 500,000 records that you can search. We also have our Register of Deeds for Johnston County, which has digitized a lot of the old land records, the deed books that include a lot of slave sales and gifts of enslaved persons. So a lot of records with names of enslaved persons. So I'll tell you a little bit about how to access those records a little bit later. So searching the slave index, when you click on the slave name index search icon, it will take you to this page that's here on the left. And there are different searches you can do. You can search by the first name of an enslaved person. You can search by the first or last name of a slave owner. You can also use a combination of the owner name and the enslaved person's name. I usually use only the first search, and I'll tell you why in a second. For this purpose, I'm going to use the search for the slave name. If you only search, if you search by the owner name and the slave name, it may only give you a certain number of records, and enslaved persons a lot of times had more than one owner. So if you're only searching for one owner name, it may miss out on other records for this same person. So I usually just use the slave name in the search. For this example, I have chosen Cornelia Andrews. There's actually an interview with Ms. Andrews that was done by the WPA in the 1930s. She was living in Selma, North Carolina at the time, and she was about 87 years old when she was interviewed, and she gave a lot of information in this interview about her early life and a lot of details that were very disturbing in her interview. A lot of these interviews seemed to hold back a lot of the truth, but she didn't hold back very much. And if you haven't read her interview, I would encourage you to do so on the WPA, the Federal Writers Project, Slave Narratives, Cornelia Andrews. So I did a search in our database on Cornelia, and of course we had included the reference to the interview in 1937 in the Federal Writers Project. But also when you do this search, it takes you to a record of, and it's not showing up here, it's, somehow it got cut off, but it will take you to a record from the 1863 assessment of slaves in Smithfield District. So over to the right is the actual record. The original is at the State Archives in Raleigh. We have photocopies of all of these slave tax lists or tax lists from 1863 during the Civil War. They also list land that was owned but this was one of the first records that you'll find that actually lists slaves and their age and their dollar valuation. So over to the right, you will see in her interview, she talks about that she belonged to Dr. McKay Vaden in Smithfield just before the war. And Dr. Vaden, by the time this tax list had been done, Dr. Vaden had died. His widow listed her slaves here, and you see Cornelia listed at age 13, and the age matches up perfectly with the age that she gave for the interview in 1937. So she would have been born about 1850. So that's one way to find a record. You can also, if you want to see all of the enslaved persons that were owned by a particular slave owner, you can certainly use the search for the slave owner name. You can use first and last name or just last name. You can even use first name if you don't know the last name of the slave owner. But it's a valuable resource. And if you find an ancestor in our slave database, it will tell you the source of the record. It will say the 1863 tax list, or it will say a deed book or a will or an estate record, and it will give you enough information so that you can actually go and find that original record, just like we did this tax list. So a little bit more about finding documents in the Register of Deeds. So I did another search and found a reference to several deed records. A lot of our deeds in Johnston County have been abstracted and indexed. So in a book called Kinfolks of Johnston County, it's an abstract of deed records from 1759 to 1865. There are quite a few slave records in here. And over to the left, you'll see, if you do a search in our searchable database, you'll see, for instance, Caroline, who has a record from 1855 that's in a deed book. The general synopsis here is that it was Henry B. Watson, the slave owner, was appointing Ephraim Page as his attorney or power of attorney to sell Negroes in the city of Richmond, Virginia. This is in 1855. The record is recorded in Deed Book Y2, page 277, and that source is given in the database. So you can take that information and you can actually go to the Register of Deeds website. You can find that deed book and page number, which is what I did. In order to find it, you have to, of course, go to the Register of Deeds website. It's a separate website for Johnston County, and you have to do a search in the historical index. There are a lot of different searches you can do, but you want to choose the historical index. And when you do that, you can either search on deeds if you're looking for land records. You can do a search of deeds and actually look at the indexes and find other records. But if you want to go straight to, if you know the book and page number, you can go straight to the bottom of that menu where you find the historical index and select the type of record that you want to locate, which is deeds in this case. These are these slave sales and gifts are recorded in the deed books along with the land transactions. Okay, select deeds, and then you go to the book and page number, enter those, and click search, and it will pull up the actual record, such as the one that you see here to the right. And this is a record where Henry B. Watson is giving power of attorney to Ephraim Page to sell in the city of Richmond, state of Virginia, or wherever they will command the highest price, namely Jordan. Trying to get my mouse to move, a little cursor to move. Let me go back here. Jordan, Vina, Clara, Caroline, Susan, Rachel, Marthaline, Shepherd, and Lydia. And these are all persons who were enslaved to the Watson family. The house is actually still standing on Brogden Road, the Watson Sanders plantation house. But this is, it was actually referred to as the Jordan plantation because Jordan was the slave foreman at that plantation. But this is basically Jordan and his wife and their children. There may have been a few extra persons who were included in this transaction. But there's the actual record. You can, of course, save a PDF of that document. You can print it out from the website. It's a great resource. And then we also have quite a few online resources that you can access for records of freedmen after 1865, or free persons of color before 1865. As I said earlier, we have over 500,000 searchable records. We have indexes for newspapers, obituaries, marriages, census records, and other kinds of records. So I won't say a whole lot more about that. We also have subscription services for newspapers.com and ancestry.com. Newspapers.com is a great resource if you're looking for a particular person. For instance, if you are looking for someone who may have been sold out of state after the Civil War ended, a lot of times people would run ads in newspapers. They would be looking for relatives that they had been separated from. So you may find ads of people in newspapers. You may find runaway slave ads also from some of the earlier newspapers. But we have found several ads that were posted after the end of the Civil War by formerly enslaved persons who were trying to locate relatives in Johnston County and elsewhere. So it's an often overlooked resource, but I would encourage anyone to use newspapers.com. It is a subscription service, and you can use it free of charge if you come to the Heritage Center. Ancestry.com also is very familiar. They have all the census records and marriages and other kinds of records that you can search. FamilySearch.org is the LDS Church's free genealogy website. It has a wealth of information that would be helpful in tracing African American ancestors. They have, for Johnston County, they have a lot of the estate records and probate records that are scanned, and a lot of those records are referenced in our slave database. So if you see a reference to a will or an estate, chances are you can go to FamilySearch.org and find digitized copies of those records. They also have the North Carolina Freedmen's Bureau records, and they include labor contracts between landlords and former slaves. They have records of schools that were built for freedmen right after the Civil War. They have reports, letters, and reports that were filed by Freedmen's Bureau agents of abuses, sometimes atrocities, but a lot of times when there was a dispute between a former slave and his landlord, person he was working for or whose land he was tending, those might have been reported to the Freedmen's Bureau. So lots of wonderful resources. Over to the right, I have one example of a contract that was entered into by William A. Smith and General Dodd in May of 1865, immediately after the surrender. This document was filed, and it's part of the Freedmen's Bureau records. I will add one other thing. The Heritage Center is an affiliate library, a Family Search affiliate library. So there are some records that you will not be able to access if you're at home and you're looking at FamilySearch.org. But if you visit the Heritage Center and use our computers, there are some records. I can't tell you specifically which ones. I've tried to get a list of all of those, but there are supposed to be quite a few records that maybe are protected by copyright, but for whatever reason, they're not part of the regular family search resources, but you can access them if you use our computers at the Johnston County Heritage Center. But I encourage you, if you haven't used Family Search, to spend some time looking at the estate records for North Carolina, the probate records, and you can search by county and by, usually you can search by the surname and pretty easily access those records. But there's a wealth of records of enslaved persons in these records. And then, of course, after the Civil War, you'll also find probate records and estate records. So if you want to actually visit the Johnston County Heritage Center, we would love to have you. Because of COVID right now, we are open by appointment only, but we trust that COVID is coming to a close in the next few months. So we're looking forward to having people come and visit us in person, because there are quite a few records that you cannot access online, that you have to come and access by visiting the Johnston County Heritage Center. So I encourage you to visit us. One of the main resources that's used is our surname files. Our collection was started over 50 years ago. So over those 50 plus years, people have come and done research, and they've shared a lot of their research materials with us. And so we have extensive files on different surnames. And some of the files are related to African-American families. A lot of times the records that might be in there that would be useful for African-American genealogy would be, about the slave owner genealogy, but sometimes that's helpful in piecing together slave genealogy, because a lot of slave records are included in these research files on white families. We also have subject files. They're fairly extensive. We have a series called African Americans, and it includes African American biographies, African American churches, schools. We have files on slavery, including copies of the slave narratives, such as Cornelia Andrews and others. You can find those online as well. But we have copies of that 1863 Johnston County tax list, which is somewhat rare. You don't see these very often, but for Johnston County, the 1863 tax list was saved, and it lists lots of names of enslaved persons and personal information about them. So we have the photocopies from the originals that are at the state archives, and they're arranged by district, tax district. We also have files on African-American businesses and organizations. So there's a wealth of information there about African-American genealogical content as well as historical. Microfilm is something that a lot of people avoid, and I understand why. Microfilm can often be very hard to read, and it's kind of cumbersome because you have to take a spool and put it on a machine and look at it on a machine. But I will say this, that there are quite a few of our Johnston County records, especially some of the estate records, that are on microfilm, and they have not been digitized, especially the estate books. They go from 1781 to about 1868. They're on microfilm, and they have a wealth of information. There are quite a few records of slaves that are in these estate books that are not digitized. You will only find them on microfilm or by going to the original books that are at the state archives in Raleigh. We're trying to get them abstracted and indexed. Elizabeth Ross did spend quite a bit of time. She's been dead for, almost 25 years now, but she spent a lot of time at the state archives going through those estate books, and she did abstracts of the earliest ones from 1781 to about 1823. And we have begun to do abstracts for the years following 1823, but there are so many records that you will not find online. You have to find them by either going to the state archives, looking at the originals, or coming to the Heritage Center and looking at the microfilm. But here's an example of an estate record for the Dr. Josiah Watson. He had quite a few plantations, one at Pineville, one at Gullies, which is near Clayton. Anyway, here's a list of all the persons who were enslaved to him when he died in 1852. And this is a record that is not digitized. So we're trying to get these abstracted and indexed and included in our slave database, but a lot of these records still have not yet been added to our searchable database on our website. We also have a number of private collections that include plantation records. A lot of these private collections also include letters written by, between family members. Sometimes they will name their servants or their slaves in the letters. So if you know the surname of, or the name of the slave owner, you may find a private collection from that family, and it may include some personal information about some of the persons who were enslaved to that family. We also have genealogical research collections. People have spent decades doing their research, and a lot of times before they die, they want to make sure that their materials are preserved, so they'll give them to us for safekeeping, and or else when someone passes away, their children will come and give us their research collection. So we have a lot of those materials that you can access as well. We would like to have more collections of papers from Johnston County African American families. We have a few, but I know there are a lot of collections out there, and we would love to have the opportunity to provide these materials for posterity. It's a central place where any member of the family can access this information, and we are very grateful that we have the space and the resources to be able to provide the right conditions and access to all this information. So if you know of someone who has papers, if it's related to Johnston County, we have, since we're a county collection, we have to stop at the county line, but we would love the opportunity to add collections that relate to Johnston County families, especially our African American families. And that concludes my presentation. I hope everyone has learned something. Good evening.